Welcome to Reflection for Thursday of the third week of Advent, or as we talked about yesterday, December 18th. As we talked about yesterday with the antiphons, with O Come Emmanuel, we have that idea again of the righteous shoot of David. Again, from the tree, Jeremiah is speaking of. Again, so that idea of hope, of restoration, because again, prophets around the time of the Babylonian exile. And what does he do after that is he makes the move to go back to the idea of the land of Egypt. What Christ comes for, and we get this from one of the narratives of the Transfiguration, is that when Moses and Elijah show up, what they're talking about with Jesus is his exodus. And so what we have here is the birth of this child is the beginning of a new exodus, much like the birth of Moses, right? Put into the water. Jesus is tied to the water. He does a lot of things with the water. Children were killed when Moses was born, when Jesus was born. And so they're looking backwards at what God had done before, again, to give them strength to go forward. What I maybe encourage you to do today or in the upcoming days is, especially if you're in a household with young people, is look back on your own life. Because for many of us, our Christmases when we were young were the most magical because we have all the hope and the anticipation. We haven't been into the throes of life sometimes. But reflect on some of those feelings that we used to have, because that's what we should still have, right? They might be tempered in different ways, but that radical trust, that radical anticipation, that great excitement is what we're meant to hold on to. That's what we're meant still to have in our heart. And so it might be one way of praying with what Jeremiah is doing with the people today. Our gospel then picks up in Matthew right after the genealogy, telling us of the birth of Christ. Today we have the Annunciation to Joseph. And so Mary, of course, tells Joseph, I'm pregnant. We don't know what's going on, but because he's a righteous man, he decides to divorce her quietly. And so he's divorcing her because they're betrothed, which oftentimes gets translated as engaged, but it's more than engaged. So again, I think I maybe mentioned this when we had the reading for Mary's Annunciation. But they're married, but they just haven't come to live together yet, but they will by the end of this reading. So they are married. And so there are a couple of different schools of thought. One is Joseph thought that Mary cheated on him, which would be a logical conclusion, even if Mary's a great human being. Of course, we know she's without sin, but people around her just probably thought she was a very good kid, young woman. But that's still a logical conclusion if somebody comes up and says, I'm pregnant. It could have been that she told the story and he believed it. And he just says, I'm not good enough to be around this. That would be an acceptable or an understandable reason. Whatever was going on, and it might be a combination of both, right? A little somewhere in the middle, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Whatever it is, Joseph is going to leave. And so the angel comes and says, don't be afraid. How does he say? He says, Joseph, son of David. Connecting it back to the ancestry, the promise. And so as soon as he says that, that's what's going to stir up in Joseph's mind, part of the promise. Don't be afraid to take Mary, your wife, into your home. For through the Holy Spirit, this child has been conceived. She'll bear a son, your name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. Much like with Mary, when the angel gives the answer, there's a chance, I think, unless it was a specific extra grace that we're not told concretely about, Mary probably still didn't fully understand what the angel said. I think the same thing might be with Joseph here when he's having the explanation of Jesus. How's this child of mine going to save all of people? How's he going to forgive their sins? I don't know. Something that I'm very curious about, and if I make it home to heaven, I want to ask Joseph about. And then it says that he took in, and of course it goes back to Old Testament prophecy of the virgin will bear a child, God with us. Joseph awoke, did as the angel had commanded, so he's faithful, does what he's supposed to do, takes his wife into his home, and had no relations with her until she bore a son, named him Jesus. And just a quick word about that idea, until she bore a son. All that's emphasizing is that Jesus was virginally conceived. The Holy Spirit came. It does not necessarily mean that they had relations after. Some people try to say that that's what it's pointing to. Not necessarily. Sometimes that's what until means. Other times, it just is pointing to a specific period. Such as, could say, I will love you until the day that I die. Or I will love you until the end of time. Right? We have these things in mind, but especially us with the idea of eternity. We know that we don't die here. And so it's not that I'm going to die, hopefully make it to heaven, maybe through purgatory. I'm not going to get to heaven and say I don't love you anymore. Right? It's just saying through the entirety of my life I'm going to love you, but that can still continue on. And you can find a bunch of different examples where in grammar that's how it works. And so just put that out there as a quick thing in case you encounter that in the world. It does not necessarily mean that it changed afterwards. But again, pray with our history, pray with the way that God loved us and took care of us in the past. God bless.